This is a reading from the Mystical City of God, the Coronation by Venerable Mary of Agreda. Chapter 16 of Volume 4. The Most Holy Mary perceives the intentions of the demon to persecute the Church. She implores the divine assistance before the throne of the Most High in heaven. She forewarns the apostles. St. James arrives in Spain to preach the gospel and is visited there by the Most Blessed Lady. 307. When Lucifer and the infernal chiefs, after the conversion of St. Paul, were plotting vengeance on the Most Holy Mary and the children of the Church, as described in the last chapter, they did not apprehend that the knowledge of this great Queen and Mistress of the world penetrated into those obscure and profound abysses of hell, and extended to the most hidden secrets of their evil counsels. Thus deceived, the bloodthirsty dragons esteemed their victory in the full execution of their schemes against her and the disciples of her Son as most certain. But from her retreat, the Blessed Mother, with the clearness of her heavenly science, knew of all their conferences and understood all the intrigues of these enemies of the light. She perceived all their aims and the means which they intended to use, their wrath against God and against her, and their mortal hatred against the apostles and the rest of the faithful. Although the most prudent lady was well aware that the demon could execute none of their fury without the permission of the Lord, yet, as this conflict in mortal life is unavoidable, and as she knew the weakness of men and their only too common ignorance of the demoniacal astuteness and malice intent on their perdition, she was filled with great solicitude and sorrow at the unanimous resolve of those jealous enemies for the destruction of the faithful. 308. In addition to this knowledge and to the charity directly drawn from the Lord, she was endowed with another kind of tireless activity, similar to that of the divinity, which continues without interruption, as one pure act. The most diligent mother was ceaselessly actuated by her love and solicitude for the glory of the Most High, and the consolation and protection of her children. At the same time, she pondered in her most chaste bosom upon the supernal mysteries, conferring the past with the present, and both with the future, and preparing for it with a more than human discretion and foresight. Her most ardent desire of the salvation of all the faithful, and her maternal compassion for their labors and dangers, compelled her to estimate all their tribulations and perils as her own, and as far as her love was concerned, she desired to suffer them all herself, if possible, while the rest of the followers of Christ should labor in the Church without molestation, meriting in joyful peace, grace, and life eternal for themselves, and leaving to her alone all sorrows and tribulations. Although this was not possible according to the equitable providence of God, yet we stand indebted to the Most Holy Mary for this extraordinary and wonderful token of love, and not unfrequently her anxious and restless love merits for us great blessings, which the Omnipotent concedes, in order to satisfy her yearnings for our salvation. 309. She did not know on this occasion what in particular were the resolves of the hellish foes in their conference, for she understood only in general that their fury was directed against her in an especial manner. Divine Providence concealed from her some of their designs, in order that the triumph she would gain over hell might afterwards be so much the more glorious. Nor was it necessary to prepare her for temptation and persecutions, as was conceded to other faithful, whom she so excelled in high and magnanimous spirit, and of whose trials and tribulations she had a clearer knowledge. According to her wont in all affairs, she resorted to prayer, consulting about them with God in pursuance of the example and teaching of the Lord. For this purpose she retired, and prostrating herself in admirable reverence and fervor upon the ground, thus besought him. 310. Most high Lord and eternal God, holy and incomprehensible, behold here prostrate before thee thy humble handmaid and vile wormlet of the earth, supplicating thee, eternal Father, through thy only begotten Son, and my Lord Jesus Christ, do not despise my petitions and sighs, which from my inmost soul I present to thy immense charity, in union with that which derive from the furnace of thy own love. Thou hast communicated to thy slave, in the name of all thy holy church, of thy apostles and thy faithful servants, I present to thee, O Lord, the sacrifice of the passion and death of thy only begotten, that of his sacramental body, the most acceptable petitions and prayers he offered to thee during the time of his mortal and passible life, the love with which he assumed flesh for the redemption of the world in my womb, his imprisonment there, and his rearing at my breast, all this I offer in order to be permitted to ask thee for that which thou seest in the desire of my heart. 311. During this prayer, the great queen was raised in divine ecstasy, in which she saw her only begotten at the right hand of the eternal Father, asking him to concede to his most blessed mother all her petitions, and representing to him that she was his true mother, entirely pleasing to the divinity, and worthy of being received and heard in all her prayers. She saw also that the eternal Father assented and was pleased with his request, and that looking upon her he said, Mary, my daughter, ascend higher. At this bidding of the Most High, an innumerable multitude of angels of different hierarchies descended from heaven, who surrounded her and raised her from the earth on which she lay prostrate. They then bore her up, body and soul, to the empyrean heaven, and placed her before the throne of the most holy Trinity, which manifested itself to her by a most exalted, not intuitive, but imaginary vision. She prostrated herself before the throne and adored God in the three persons with the most profound humility and reverence, at the same time thanking her divine Son for having presented her petition to the eternal Father and asking him again to do so. The divine Lord at the right hand of his Father, acknowledging her as his worthy mother and the Queen of Heaven, would not forget the obedience he had shown her on earth. Luke chapter 2, verse 51. But, in the presence of all the courtiers of heaven, renewed the acknowledgement of his filial obligations, and again presented to the Father the wishes and prayers of his most blessed mother. And the eternal Father answered in these words, 312, My Son, in whom my will finds the plenitude of satisfaction, my ears are attentive to clamors of thy mother, and my clemency is inclined toward all her desires and petitions. Then turning to the most blessed Mary, he said, My beloved daughter, chosen from myriads according to my pleasure, thou shalt be the instrument of my omnipotence and the treasure of my love. Let thy anxiety rest, and tell me, my daughter, what thou askest, for toward thy desires and petitions, which are holy in my eyes, my will inclines. Thus favored, the Blessed Mary answered, My eternal Father and most high God, who art the author and preserver of the whole world, thy holy church is the object of my solicitude and prayer. Remember in thy kindness that it is the work of thy only begotten, who became man and acquired and planted it by his own blood. Acts chapter 20, verse 28. Anew the infernal dragon and all thy enemies, his allies, are raising up against it, and are attempting the ruin and perdition of all thy faithful, who are the fruit of the redemption of thy Son. Confound the evil counsels of the ancient serpent, and defend thy servants, the apostles, and the other faithful of the church, in order that they may be freed from the attacks and fury of these enemies. Let them all direct their assaults against me, if possible. I, my Lord, am only one poor creature, and thy servants are many. Let them enjoy thy favors and thy peace, by which they advance thy exaltation and glory. Let me suffer the tribulations which threaten them. Let me battle against thy enemies, and thou, by the power of thy arm, shalt overcome and confound their malice. 313. My spouse and my beloved, answered the eternal Father, thy desires are acceptable in my eyes, and I will grant thy petition as far as is possible. I shall defend my servants in what is proper and conducive to my glory, and permit them to suffer in what is necessary for their crown. In order that thou mayest understand the secret of my wisdom, by which these mysteries are to be fulfilled, I wish to raise thee to my throne, where thy ardent charity merits thee a place in the consistory of our great councils, and in the participation of our divine attributes. Come, my beloved, and thou shalt understand our secrets for the government of the church, its increase and progress, and thou shalt follow thy will, which is ours, now about to be manifested to thee. By the force of those most sweet words, Mary felt herself raised to the throne of the divinity, and placed at the right hand of her Son, to the admiration and joy of all the blessed, who recognized the voice and the will of the Almighty, and truly it was wonderful and new to all the angels and saints to see a woman in mortal flesh called and elevated to the throne and council of the most blessed Trinity, in order to be informed of the mysteries hidden to the rest and enshrined in the bosom of God for the government of the Church. 314. It would seem astounding if in some city of this world some woman were called to the councils of the government, and still more surprising to introduce her into the select and close circles where the more difficult the important matters of the whole government are discussed and transacted. Such a course would of right seem hazardous, since Solomon says that in seeking truth and reason among men, he found but 1 out of 1,000 who followed it, and among women not one. On account of their natural frailty, there are so few of them who possess constancy and integrity of judgment that ordinarily it is presumed in none. And if there are any, they are scarcely capable of managing affairs that are difficult of understanding and require deep insight, unless they are aided by other light beyond the ordinary and natural. This common law did not extend to our great Queen and Lady. For if on the one hand, our mother Eve in her ignorance began by destroying the palace of this world built by God, on the other hand, the most blessed Mary, who was most wise and the mother of wisdom, rebuilt it and restored it by her peerless prudence. And therefore she was worthy to enter into the councils of the most holy Trinity, where its restoration was to be planned. 315. There she was again asked what favors she requested and desired for herself, and for the whole church in particular, for the apostles and disciples of the Lord. The most prudent mother repeated her most fervent desires for the glory and exaltation of God's holy name, and for restriction of the persecution designed by the enemies of the Lord against the faithful. Although the 3 persons of the most holy Trinity well knew all her desires, yet they commanded the great lady to propose them, in order to elicit their approbation and delight, and in order to make her more capable of new mysteries of their divine wisdom and the predestination of the elect. To explain what has been shown me of this sacrament, I will say that because the will of the most holy Mary was most just, holy, and in all things pleasing and conformable to the most blessed Trinity, it seems, according to our way of understanding such things, God could not will anything contrary to this most pure lady, for he was bent in the direction of her holiness, and was wounded by the hair and eyes of so beloved a spouse. Canticle chapter 4, verse 9. And one so singular among all creatures. And since the Father looked upon her as his daughter, the Son as his mother, and the Holy Ghost as his spouse, and since all 3 had entrusted to her the church in fullest confidence, therefore the 3 persons did not wish to decree the execution of anything without, as it were, consulting the wisdom and the pleasure of the Queen of all creation. 316. In order that the will of the Most High and of the Most Blessed Mary might coincide in these decrees, it was necessary that the great lady should first receive a new measure of science and insight into the most hidden counsels of his providence, by which all the affairs of his creatures are arranged in weight and measure. Wisdom chapter 11, verse 21. And all their means and ends in highest equity and propriety. For this purpose, the Most Holy Mary received on this occasion a most clear insight in all that was to be done and preordained by the divine power in the church militant. She saw the most hidden reason for all that was to be done, how many and which of the apostles were to die before she should pass from this life, the labors they were to undertake for the name of the Lord, and the reason why all this should be so, according to the secret judgments of God and the predestination of saints, and why they should thus shed their blood for the planting of the church, just as the Lord and Redeemer had shed his for its foundation in his passion and death. She understood also how, through her own compassion and sorrow at seeing the sufferings of the apostles and followers of Christ, she could compensate herself for not being allowed to take upon herself their sufferings as she desired, for this momentary labor could not be spared them, if they were to reach the eternal reward in store for them. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 17. To afford the great lady an opportunity for this kind of merit, She was informed of the near death of St. James and the imprisonment of St. Peter, but not of his liberation by an angel. She understood also that the Lord portioned out to the apostles and the faithful that kind of suffering or martyrdom which corresponded with each one's grace and strength of soul. 317. In order to satisfy in all things the most ardent charity of his purest mother, the Lord permitted her to fight anew all the battles with the dragons of hell, and gain over them victories and triumphs which the rest of the mortals shall never attain. By this means she was to crush their head and humble their pride, weakening their forces and breaking their strength, which they were mustering against the faithful. God renewed in her all his gifts and participations in his divine attributes, and each of the three persons gave her his blessing. The holy angels brought her back to the cenacle in the way as they had brought her to the empyrean heaven. As soon as she found herself recovered from her ecstasy, she prostrated herself with her face upon the ground in the form of a cross, and with most tender tears and incredible humility thanked the Almighty for this new blessing conferred upon her in answer to her most humble petitions. For some time she conferred with her holy angels concerning the mysteries and necessities of the Church in order to attend to its most pressing needs. It seemed advisable to prepare and encourage the apostles for coming trouble, since the common enemy was to direct his main battle against them. For this purpose she spoke to St. Peter, St. John, and the rest in Jerusalem, advising them of many particulars that were to happen to them and to the whole Church, confirming the report of the conversion of St. Paul, and telling them of the zeal with which he was preaching the name of his Master and Lord. 318. To those apostles and disciples who were not in Jerusalem, she sent angels in order to notify them of the conversion of St. Paul, and in order to prepare and encourage them with the same good counsels as those in Jerusalem. She sent an especial angelic messenger to warn St. Paul of the intended assaults of the devil, and to animate and confirm him with the hope of divine assistance in his tribulations. Obediently, the angels fulfilled all these errands with their accustomed celerity, manifesting themselves in visible forms to the apostles and disciples. All of them were exceedingly consoled and encouraged by these favors of the most blessed Mary, and each one answered through the same envoys, sending humble acknowledgment and offering themselves to die for the honor of their Redeemer and Master. St. Paul especially showed this gratitude in his answer, for his desire of seeing and thanking his protectress urged him to demonstrate his devotion in a more fervent manner. He was at that time in Damascus, preaching and disputing in the synagogues, although soon after he went to Arabia to preach. But from there he afterwards came to Damascus a second time, as I shall relate further on. St. James, 319. St. James the Great was farther away than any of the others. He was the first one to leave Jerusalem, and having preached some days in Judea, he departed for Spain. For this journey he embarked at Joppa, which is now called Jaffa, in the year 35, in the month of August, called Sextilis, 1 year and 5 months after the Passion of the Lord, 8 months after the martyrdom of St. Stephen, and 5 months before the conversion of St. Paul, all according to what I said in the 11th and 14th chapters of this last part. Sailing from Jaffa, St. James touched at Sardinia, and shortly afterwards arrived in Spain, disembarking at the port of Carthagena, where he began his preaching. He tarried but a short time in Carthagena, and guided by the Spirit of the Lord, he took his way to Granada, where he was made aware that the harvest was bountiful and the occasion opportune for beginning his labors for his Master. And so it really turned out.